Hey guys, it's Libby, and today I'm doing my top 10 books of 2017. Now I'm gonna do this slightly differently than my previous top 10 lists because between reading a whole bunch of naturalist drama by like Ibsen and Chekhov and Strindberg, and my newfound love of George Bernard Shaw, and trying to finish off the complete works of William Shakespeare, this kind of ended up being the year of the play for me. In fact, I read less than 50% novels this year. The rest of what I read was plays, poetry, short stories, that sort of thing. And for the most part, I liked the things that weren't novels a lot more than the things that were novels. Like, I think I only gave 2 5-star ratings to novels this year. Most of my 5 stars went to other things. But I know that BookTube is primarily a place of novels. So what I've done is I've picked my top 5 novels and my top 5 things that aren't novels, and I'm going to alternate until we get to the top. But just to know that for the most part, I liked the things that are not novels better than the things that are novels on this list. And some of the things that are lower down on the novels list, like my 5th and my 4th favorite, I'm not like, oh my god, these are amazing, earth-shattering books. I'm just like, yeah, that was pretty good. So my 5th favorite novel of the year, to which I gave 4 stars, was Life After Life by Kate Atkinson. This is the story of Ursula Todd and how she repeatedly dies and the universe has to reset in order to get her to her ultimate destiny, which is to kill Hitler. So it's an unusual format, but that does allow you to both have an intimate personal story of Ursula and also to experience a lot of the major events of the 20th century, because, you know, since the universe is organizing itself around Ursula, she tends to get involved in fairly significant things. She has to try to get through the influenza epidemic of 1918 several times, and we also get to see the events of World War II from several different angles as Ursula's involvement changes with them with her different lives. My 5th favorite non-novel, all but one of my non-novels are plays, so I might just end up calling them plays. So my 5th favorite play of 2017 was The Seagull by Anton Chekhov. This play is a little bit hard to talk about because so little happens in it, but I enjoyed it as a meta sort of commentary on the state of theater at the time. Chekhov intentionally gave it very little plot and very little action in order to contrast it to the melodrama and the bombast that was typical of theater in the 19th century. So if you want to sit around and have like deep thoughts about art, this is a great play to read. Now, my 4th favorite novel and 4th favorite play of the year actually pair up in kind of an interesting way. They are Our Mutual Friend by Charles Dickens and Henry IV Part 2 by William Shakespeare. Now, Our Mutual Friend, most of it I thought was very good. I spent the majority of the book going, wow, this is very insightful and well written and I'm enjoying myself, but there was one part that I just absolutely hated, so I've decided that it doesn't exist. On the other hand, Henry IV Part 2, I went through most of this book going, this is just kind of okay, but then there was one scene that was just so amazing and it blew my mind, and I kind of couldn't sleep afterwards because I just was thinking about this play so much. So Our Mutual Friend, as you would expect from Charles Dickens, has lots and lots of characters, and they all have different amounts of money and social respectability and different attitudes towards money and respectability. And Dickens is sort of examining the disparity between social class and economic class. A lot of times we say socioeconomic class, but in a lot of ways those are different things. And then it takes that sort of whole sphere and applies it to how people can be kind or cruel to each other. So I thought this was a really interesting play to read from the perspective of a critique of capitalism. I've been taking a more economic reading of my literature lately, possibly because hashtag adventures in late-stage capitalism is now a thing that's trending softly on Twitter. And also, since I've been reading so much Shakespeare, Shakespeare was writing at sort of the birth of modern capitalism, when people were sort of trying to figure out how it works and also how do you fit the human into this new economic model. And so it was interesting to read something from the 19th century, which is where capitalism got its really big shake-up with the Industrial Revolution. And then Henry IV Part 2, the follow-up to Henry IV Part 1. There's a little bit of tidying up of the revolt against King Henry IV that started in Henry IV Part 1, but this is mainly about Prince Hal reconciling with his father and deciding that he does not want to hang out with Falstaff anymore. And most of it is just like fine. I've said before, I don't particularly enjoy Falstaff because like 16th, 17th century humor doesn't work so great anymore, and so the funny parts I don't love, but the dramatic parts are so good. So the scene that I absolutely love, even if you don't want to read this whole play, please just go read this scene. It is Act 4, Scene 5. Since reading this, I have gone back to reread the scene several times. I think I have cried every time I read it. It's so amazing. Okay, now moving on to my 5th favorite novel and 5th favorite play. So the novel is Call Me By Your Name by Andre Aciman. This is a love story between two young men in the 1980s. It's set in Italy, the land of romance, and we spend most of our time deep in the interior thoughts of one of the people in this relationship, Elio. And I really like intensely psychological novels, so this was right up my alley. I initially picked this up because I saw a trailer for the film, so at first I thought this was just a film, and then I realized it was a book later. And the film has now come out in the United States, but not in the Netherlands, which is where I live, and there currently is no release date for the Netherlands. I cannot describe to you how upset I am about this. I was kind of secretly hoping that it would be bad so that I wouldn't have to suffer through the fact that I am not able to see this movie, but apparently it's really good. And then 3rd favorite play was Ghosts by Henrik Ibsen. Now this got a little bit of help because it has a very sort of tight relationship with a play that I'd read before and I knew that I loved, which is An Enemy of the People, which is by Henrik Ibsen. So Ibsen wrote An Enemy of the People, which is about basically all of society turning against this one guy who is like a truth teller, because of the way he felt society turned against him with the truths he was telling in the play Ghosts. So this is about a woman named Mrs. Alving whose husband has recently died, and everyone thought that he was a great man, but he was in fact a horrible man. And so she is stuck in this difficult position of dealing with his legacy. And sort of the one bright spot in this situation is that Mrs. Alving, her son, is coming home. She sent him away to a boarding school so that he wouldn't be raised around his horrible father. But when her son returns, she sees that even though her son was raised apart from her husband, the things that her husband did has still managed to make her son's life miserable. It's one of Ibsen's most emotional plays, and it really makes you think about how behind the facade that everyone puts up in their lives, there's can be like just a whole lot of mess. Then, 2nd favorite novel. I feel like we're coming down to the predictable ones. This is the first novel that I gave 5 stars to in 2017, and it is The Mayor of Casterbridge by Thomas Hardy. Who'd have thunk Libby loved a Thomas Hardy novel? This is about a man whose quick temper kind of ruins the lives of everyone that he cares about, and how he tries to reform himself. And, you know, in many ways fails. This is not my favorite Hardy novel for its character development, but I really enjoyed it for its plot. Hardy is just so inventive with his storytelling, and he somehow, like, I know this is contradictory, but every event somehow feels like it's fated, like it happens totally at random, but still the choices of the characters really affect what's going on, which is impossible. Can't have free will, determinism, and randomness, but everything that happens in specifically this book, but also his other books, does feel like that. And so when you're reading it, you feel this strange combination of empowerment and powerlessness. I don't know if I'm selling this, but I really enjoy it. Then my second favorite play, or technically this is actually my first favorite play, because the last thing I'm going to mention is not a play. It is Major Barbara by George Bernard Shaw. Oh, what an excellent play. This play is sort of set up as a debate between Barbara, who is a major in the Salvation Army at the beginning of the 20th century, and her father, Mr. Undershaft, who runs a weapons manufactory. And so it has a lot of really interesting things to say about ethics and what is it to do good to people or do good for people. In my Goodreads review, I called it a perfect play because there is not a single line of it that I would change. So now we are getting down to my top novel and my top not a novel of 2017. Looking back at the other ones, I think it's interesting how many of the things I really liked this year dealt with parent-child relationships. In Life After Life, since Ursula is a child for a lot of the book and sort of keeps going back to being a child, we get to see her relationship with her parents more than you normally would. And I actually found her mother to be the most interesting character in the book. The multi-generational aspect of the Seagull is really important. Our mutual friend has a lot of interesting things to say about father-daughter relationships. We see a lot of sort of failures as fathers, and their daughters need to sort of step up to run the household. Henry IV Part 2, of course, is all about that father-son relationship, and I think King Henry IV and Prince Hal that's like my favorite familial bond in literature. Call Me By Your Name is primarily about the romantic relationship, but since Elio is so young, he's 17 and he's living with his parents, you get to see a lot of his interactions with his parents as well. Ghosts, obviously the two main characters are a woman and her son. The Mayor of Casterbridge as well, the primary relationship is between a father and a daughter, and also Major Barbara. Primary relationship is between a father and a daughter. And then in my top two books of the year, they are not about your relationships with your parents at all. This is all about like the mushy-feely love stuff, guys. Shout out to my parents, by the way. You were way better than like most of the people I have just talked about. I managed to make it to adulthood without being sold into slavery, becoming a Nazi, or contracting syphilis. So apparently, in the grand scheme of things, success. So my number one novel of the year, which I read quite late in the year, you all know what's coming, it's Maurice by E.M. Forster. So much love. So much love. This is the coming-of-age story of a gay man in the early 20th century. It sounds like it might be sad. There are some sad things that happen, but it's ultimately a happy and a heartwarming story. It's about love and shame and sexual desire and being confused about yourself and just all of the most interesting human stuff. This book is great. And here we go. The best thing that I read in all of 2017, excluding rereads. I should have mentioned that. Excluding rereads. But the best new thing that I read in 2017, it was the Sonnets of William Shakespeare. I read these for the first time back in April. I've since dipped into them to read a couple or a couple dozen every now and then. And after I finished reading it for the first time, my first reaction was anger that like no one had told me to read these before. I'm not sure who I was angry at because like most people haven't read Shakespeare sonnets, but I feel like society, you should know that this is maybe the best stuff Shakespeare ever wrote. These 154 sonnets contain romantic poetry to both a man and a woman. And if you want to be like, oh no, it's ambiguous whether the poems to a man are romantic or if they're just friends, okay, go back to the 19th century with the rest of the homophobes. And Shakespeare is one of my favorite authors, if not my favorite author. I feel weird saying that Shakespeare is my favorite author because, I don't know, it feels a bit obvious. But he's at least in, like, my top 5 authors of all time. He's so good, y'all. And I did not know that he was bisexual, like me, until this year. And I'm like, why did no one tell me this? Anyway, I can talk about these poems non-emotionally if I need to as well. So the reason I think that they are so great as a collection is because they combine all of the best parts of lyric poetry and of narrative poetry. Those are the two big categories of poetry. Narrative poetry is there to tell a story. It's typically hundreds or thousands of lines, and the emphasis is more on the plot of what's going on in the narrative than on the craft of each individual line. Whereas lyric poetry is typically under 100 lines. I just made these numbers up, by the way, they're not official. Lyric poetry is typically under 100 lines, and it's generally not telling a story. It's more descriptive of like nature or of your internal state. And in lyric poetry, the writer is trying to do something interesting and meaningful with the structure of the poem. And so these are a bunch of 14-line sonnets. So each one individually is a lyric poem, and a really well-crafted lyric poem, if I may say so. But then when you read them all together, you can see a story emerge and they become a narrative poem. So it's like if you have a narrative poem where each line gets the attention paid to it that you would find in a lyric poem. And I guess that is why Shakespeare's Sonnets, best book of 2017. Thank you very much for watching, guys. See you later.